Well, it's great to see you. I think that's one of the things that has been a good silver lining of this whole COVID experience is that I finally get to see the musician. We get to have kind of like a virtual cup of coffee. So it's great to see you.
Likewise, yeah.
So, new material out. Speaking of COVID, you survived a pandemic. It really did its thing on the musicians community more than anything else. I mean, it was harsh. So,
Mhm.
how did you get through it, and how good does having an album out now feel?
Um, yeah, I looking back on it, it's crazy that it's been more than 3 years, but I feel like, it's just something that kind of lingers. Just something that I try to, I guess, now that I'm back and playing gigs all the time, you know, I try to remember a time when I couldn't, just go out and play all the time and
Yeah.
try to appreciate it more, despite it is tough working as a musician, running around from place to place, but also it's a beautiful thing and something to really not take lightly or take for granted. I think the pandemic, like especially the lockdown, the first spring, those few months was really kind of like the toughest time. And so, yeah, for me, like writing music was a huge outlet, just creatively, just thinking toward the future at that time. And then finally getting able to record it, in 2021, 2022, and now the album's coming out. Um, yeah, it just seems like it's been a long time coming, and it's a kind of a relief to put it out into the world.
So do the crowds feel different? I mean, I know that, the hope was that there would be this permanent feeling. Has it lasted?
I mean, it's not as pronounced as I remember like when we first really start playing gigs seriously. Again, like we played outdoors a bit in mid late 2022, and then more indoor stuff after the vaccine came out in 2021. That was amazing. I mean, people were just so happy. I think it's pretty much settled to sort of how it was before the pandemic now. I mean, there's just a lot of chatter and people are trying to have a good time, and the music's happening, whether
Yeah.
or not, they came there for that in the places where I play. But yeah, I think generally it seems like, a lot of venues did close, unfortunately, in New York and elsewhere, but also many new venues opened up. So I think it's just part of the natural cycle of things. And yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think crowds are into live music as much as they ever were.
Yeah. So the depths of memory, this seems like a very expansive project. A lot was put into it. Your signature sound is obviously in there and evolving. Talk to me about how you put this project together.
Sure. So I mentioned it was a long time coming. Some of the music on this album actually I started before the pandemic, like 2019. And I think the first performances of some of the music, I mean, I'm thinking in particular, the whole second half of the album, which is a suite called Depths in Slow Motion, and also the second half of the first disc, another three-part suite called Eponymous Cycle. We basically did a premiere of like a very early version of each of those pieces in February 2020. And then the lockdown happened, and I put the music away, and I started working on some new stuff. The sketches that which became from all this stillness on the first disc, and then when I started gigging regularly in 2021, I looked back at that music I'd written, and I thought, I wanted to do something with it. I didn't want to just let it sit there, and so I them quite a lot, and played them live, a number of times, and then we just decided to record and, kind of put it behind us. So that's kind of how that music came together.
So what are you hoping the listener gets from this project?
It's a great question. I think the music is not sort of conventional jazz in the sense of stuff that I would expect to see in a club. It's kind of a little more. It's generally quieter. It's generally slower moving, but that's all sort of intentional. I think there's a lot of detail and room for nuance and sort of subtlety for the different musicians who are improvising and interpreting the music. And I hope the listener, when they start listening to the album, they can kind of find themselves maybe exploring those different kind of more atmospheric kind of feelings, it's sort of being taken outside of the everyday experience and maybe stuff that they're more used to listening to in a live setting, and maybe getting something that may was is maybe better suited for like a sit down and put on a record type experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does. So, the one thing about the pandemic is that there was a lot of people that left big cities, especially New York. It was too expensive. There was an uncertainty. And even people that were going into school. There was just this unknowing and going into a realm that may not pay as much, things along those lines. But it almost seems as though it's come back stronger than ever. What's your kind of beat on the jazz community now, coming back and getting back into live shows and releasing albums?
Just sort of how it feels generally right now.
Yeah, just kind of what's your sense?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think one thing that was really noticeable is that I think, and I've heard many people say this about other things, outside of music, but related to the effects of the pandemic, which is that sort of accelerated life. I think for a lot of people, like one year, I don't know, caused 5 years of like normal life events to happen really quickly. And so, like you said, a lot of musicians decided to move out of New York, and so I feel like in a way, it was advantageous for me because I feel like I got a lot of opportunities that it would have probably would have taken more years, to get up there. But because there are more, uh, essentially like vacancies, people needed a saxophone player, maybe their favorite saxophone player is not available anymore. So they're going down the list. So all of a sudden, that opens up opportunities for younger musicians like myself. And I also feel like, just, now that I'm playing with more and more different people, like the younger generation, like when I moved to New York 7 years ago, I feel like I was absolutely like part of the youngest generation, and now it's definitely not the case. And I'm just seeing there's a huge, you know, crop of new musicians who are incredible and have a different perspective, a different, totally different outlook from even what I have. I think that's sort of really exciting. Just seeing that, the generations keep coming in New York, and they're coming faster and stronger, and so on.
So that's interesting you bring that up about being a veteran now on the scene. What is it that you try to teach younger players that you get around? What do you ultimately want to impart? What wisdom? Because that's the big thing. The elder statesman of jazz always has an eye on the torch getting passed on. What is that for you?
Wow. Well, I guess I'll just preface it by saying, I still do feel like I'm really young on the jazz scene. I mean, I'm 31. So, I've heard older musicians say, describe 30-year-old musicians as being sort of like, babies in the jazz scene. But it's all relative, obviously. Like,
Yeah.
depends on your experience and where you are in your kind of like career trajectory and such. I think, as a musician, I just try to stay humble. I try to focus on the fundamentals, good sound, good time. If the music is supposed to swing, I try to help make the band swing, not just myself. And if it's maybe a more like contemporary or experimental setting, I basically just try to make the band sound good. Um, like I do want to sound good, but at the end of the day, it's more important that the music's being served, and so I'm just trying to serve that as best as I can, and I guess also, not let personal life things get in the way of the music. Like just, put that all aside and just try to, be humble and selfless as I can, and make something, that maybe is worth listening to, collaboratively.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, by the time we talk about this album, you're already moving on. You've been working on this for a while, you're promoting it now, but you're in this kind of moment where, the line keeps getting drawn. So I'm curious, as we move forward right now towards the end of this year, what do you have for live shows, promoting, anything in the hopper? What's going on with you?
Yeah, that's a great point. I really do feel like this music, it's new to the world, but I've known about this music for years. So, yeah, I've been thinking forward for a long time. I mean, definitely for next year, I already have two quartet albums that are fully recorded. They're ready to go. So that's like a documentation of live music I've been playing over the past 2 years. I've had this residency at a bar called Lowlands Bar, which is it's in Gowanus, Brooklyn. Essentially, it's like 2 blocks from where I live. So I've been playing there every Tuesday. I have a couple regular bands that I play with, and also I try to, play with different groups. But, I documented a lot of that music that I worked out over the past 2 years on those recordings. And currently, I have a trio that I'm playing with a lot, with Walter Stinson on bass and Kayvon Gordon on drums. So we've been playing and working on a lot of new music, and I expect, we're going to continue playing at Lowlands and other venues, through the rest of the year, next year. Um, what else? There's another band I play in called Mute, which is, like a collaborative co-led band with, this pianist Christian Lee, bassist Lim Yang, and this drummer who used to live in New York but moved back to Korea named Daeon Suk. So we recorded another album, I want to say two years ago already, but it's finally coming out next year. Um, and then yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's mostly I expect I'm mostly going to be playing around Brooklyn locally, but I might try to take something on the road, maybe the trio next year.
The one thing about a residency, and I talk to musicians a lot about this, there's so much uncertainty that goes into being a player. But to have a residency, does that take kind of some pressure off of you? And you have an actual pedestal every week to test out new material. How does that work on your brain to have a residency?
Yeah, it's definitely a huge privilege and a blessing. It's something I've always wanted, I think, like a regular place to play, like since I was a teenager. But, it's so rare these days. Economically, it's just so hard for a venue to justify having the same person be there if they're not super famous. And
Yeah.
if they're super famous, they're probably not going to be willing to play in, a random, small place where they're not making a lot of money. But from my perspective, yeah, it takes the pressure off of having to hustle for gigs, emailing people, calling people, and just going to venues and just asking, the people for a date. Um, I think the biggest thing it does is it takes the pressure off of feeling you have to really present something at every gig, if that makes sense. Like if
Yeah.
you're playing once a month with your band, and it's at a different venue every month, you feel like you really have to accomplish something or do something big, which, it's good in one sense in terms of motivation and focus. But in the other sense, I think it forces or it makes you tend to maybe approach the music in a certain way that is maybe not productive. And I think that being able to just play and have the stakes be a bit lower because you are playing every week means that you end up stumbling into things that you wouldn't have done otherwise, or you try things out that if you only had one gig a month, you're not going to take that risk necessarily. It doesn't feel right. And so I think the music feels a lot more natural, and we've um, found more ways through it that than maybe we would have if I didn't have this residency.
So, Kevin, The Depths of Memories, the new album, where's the best place for people to pick it up, learn more about you, previous projects, live shows? Where do they go?
Well, I can always direct people toward Bandcamp. So I'm on Bandcamp. If you just search Kevin Sun Bandcamp, it's all there. If you like to stream it, it's pretty much everywhere. It's on Spotify, Apple Music, Tidal, Amazon Music, essentially anywhere you can stream. It's on YouTube. But if you buy it on Bandcamp, all the money goes straight to me. So I would appreciate that. And yeah, I have a website, kevinsun.com. That's where all my shows and dates are. I'm on Instagram at sunthekevin. I'm also on Twitter and Facebook. You can just search and it'll be the version of me that is playing saxophone.
I love it. Kevin, this has been great, man. Thank you for opening up. Thanks for your time. Good luck with the album and everything else, man.
Thanks, Joe. I really appreciate it.
Yes, sir.